Morning, pig fans. Any of you feeling like you're locked up in prison, you're incarcerated in your own house, you're bored, you don't know what to do next, you're feeling tired and restless? Spare a thought for the people we actually put in prison. Now, this here is a book for those of you used to reading backwards like that I wrote about 7 years ago about our justice system and how we need to reform our justice system so that we actually get the results we want from our justice system. The one thing we don't want from our justice system is people in prison. Now that may sound a bit controversial, because what seems to happen over here, and particularly in the States, is that they think the solution to everything is to stick people in prison. Well, it doesn't work. It doesn't work here, it doesn't work there. And in that book, Put Victims First, I explain a whole reasoned rationale, not just of why it doesn't work, but how we need to change what we're doing and change the structure of our justice system so that we get a system that does what it says on here. It puts victims first. It understands that the point of justice is to look after the victim. It's not to look after the people who are the problem or the beneficiaries of the crime business, be they the legal system or whatever. Yesterday I was listening to Donald. I have to listen to him because obviously I did some sins in a former life, and some Buddhist get up there has driven me to feel like I must follow what he's saying to see what the Americans are actually up to. And leaving aside that yesterday was 1 hour 40 of insistent, it was just like a party political broadcast. This guy is campaigning. He's given up the idea yesterday of really what is the whole point of these announcements, and he just went straight into a new campaign. And those campaigns, he opened up yesterday, wait for it, a new war on drugs. He went into the idea of we're going to build some more wall, and just, sort of incoherent rants with occasional figures thrown in. But I want to talk about this idea of the war on drugs, right? My little nephew, her boyfriend, has just taken a job in a local city, home, in charge of housing the homeless over this epidemic. And he said something that's quite interesting. Their number one problem is this: that unfortunately, just before all this happened, and the shit really hit the fan, say about 2 or 3 weeks ago, Kent police had this big sort of cross-border, what a concept, London and Kent. County lines, they called it, county lines drug dealing. That's the new buzzword, and they had this operation, and they swooped down and they took in a load of drugs, right? And it's left a slight problem in our local city, in that there isn't any heroin, or there's not enough heroin to go around. Now normally, let me get this clear, I don't take drugs, I never have particularly taken drugs. I've had the odd split, but it's not for me, that sort of thing. And I don't have an opinion about other people who do take drugs, because I like a drink. I'm quite open about it. I like a good beer. I love a red wine. I love an Armagnac. I don't see any problem with that. I behave sensibly while I'm doing it most of the time. And that's my particular poison. Other people want to take drugs. What issue is it to me whether you want to get a bit off your head on a bit of weed, or heroin does your thing, or crystal meth is what really floats your boat? It's not for me, the individual, to have an opinion about that. I have an absolute opinion about what you should do whilst you're on drugs, but that's a completely different issue. I don't have a moral opinion about you've had a joint, therefore you're not going to heaven, therefore you're a bad person, therefore you should go to prison. I don't have that kind of opinion. But in the States, because of the new campaign, because what's happened yesterday is Trump's got a bit tired of being asked questions about, well, how come you haven't done the things that would seem sensible, that he's figured, right, I'll open up a new front and I'll go off on these tangents here and people will stop thinking about things. If they think I'm fighting and winning a war against drugs, then that will be good enough and I'll get re-elected. And yesterday was a fairly shameless piece of electioneering, and the idea of war on drugs is kind of incredibly laughable, really. What we kind of do over here is this: we figure we have our system where we made drugs illegal. We made drugs illegal back in late Victorian times, and around the sort of start of the last century, we started to gradually make more and more drugs illegal. Interestingly, the idea of Victorian times, Queen Victoria was a laudanum addict. That means she used to drink opium every day. And loads of people used to do it back then. It was kind of a medicinal way of dealing with yourself. And people obviously, some people obviously take drugs. They do take drugs. I can't argue, Do I think it's a good idea for these guys to take drugs? No, I don't, because I've watched plenty of people muck their lives up. That said, I've watched other people who get away with it. But what should we as a society be thinking about drugs? If Donald's off on a war on drugs, are we going to do the same thing here? Is this a really good time to have a war on drugs? See, I'm thinking to myself, in our local city, where we've got these homeless guys who can't get their hands on heroin, they've got a problem. Normally, if I did spend about 7 or 8 years in the legal system working with offenders, young offenders, and all sorts of people, drug addicts, sex offenders, and so I've got a little bit of experience about what I'm talking about here. What they do for people who are heroin addicts is they give them methadone. Methadone's a pretend heroin. It's like a substitute. It's not as good. It's meant to be not as addictive. That's complete cock. If you ask anyone who's addicted to methadone, they're just as addicted to methadone as they were to heroin. And what happens is the state gives people methadone on a prescription, and then the people who've got the methadone sell it so that they can buy some heroin. So it's kind of like, it's an odd loop where the government is in this position of not morally understanding what it's doing and figuring, well, the idea is we'll give them something that can get them off heroin, and that will solve our moral conscience, and it will prove that we're doing something that's of benefit to society, and but it doesn't work. What works for people who are taking heroin is that you give them heroin, and then when they've had enough of taking heroin, they decide one day that they're either going to have to continue taking heroin and die, or now is the time for them to stop because they're going to die. And that, brutally, is pretty much what happens with most people who are taking very hard drugs like that. They go down the line, everything falls apart, and they have to get to that point where they decide, right, well, that's it, I've done with it, and then they decide to stop. And actually, the idea of giving them other drugs is kind of doesn't really work. Anyway, I'm a little at odds with some people about this, because there's a whole business in this country built around people who make tons of money out of ineffective cures and remedies. Normally we would have called them snake oil salesmen, but now we call them rehab centres and things like that. Anywho, Donald has decided that in amidst all this chaos and whatever, what would be a good idea would be to restrict drugs to people who are desperate for drugs. Now, personally, I don't see that as a good idea. Personally, what I would do is this. Donald says, well, all the drugs are coming up from these cartels in Venezuela and Mexico. We know who they are. We know what they're doing. We're building a wall. That'll stop them doing it. They're killing 70,000 people a year in the US. They were killing them before this happened, and that didn't seem to bother them. But now we're coming up to election time. We'll drag out the old war on drugs drum and give that a damn good banging again. So what we're going to do is we're going to fight the war on drugs. Now what I would do is this. It's quite simply, I would say, God, we know where all those drugs are coming from. Do you know what we'll do? It's a national emergency. I'll go down there and buy them, like on bulk, and we'll bring them up here and we'll give them out for free. And you go, well, you couldn't do that, Andy. That's a ludicrous thing to do. You can't go giving drug addicts drugs for free. You've got to give them methadone for free. You can't give them drugs for free. What the fuck do you think you're doing? What kind of a thinker are you? You haven't given this any thought whatsoever, have you? You're going to make this situation much, much worse. And I think to myself, really would we make this situation much, much worse? If someone is desperate for drugs, they will do all sorts of things. So why would we say, well, what we'll do is we'll fight a war against them having those drugs, and then instead of spending our time looking after the people who are ill, we'll divert half of our forces into looking after those people, policing them, getting them to do what we say, losing the battle against drugs again and again and again, but winning political votes out of it. Wouldn't we be much better off to go, look guys, if you've got a problem with drugs, if you go down to the corner there, you don't have to buy it off that bloke in the projects down there or whatever. You can have it from the state. It's a national state of emergency. Take the drugs. You don't even have to put your name down for them. If at the end of this period you figure, my God, I have got problems here, I am fucking my entire life up by taking these drugs, and you would like some help, give us a ring and we'll come round and talk with you. And you can have the drugs even then. Because what happens with people who want things like that, want drugs, well, I remember this from when I used to smoke. What really does you in is the fact that you know you can't get them, and that then makes people very, very desperate. So my thing today is think about prisons, think about being in a prison, because in an odd sense, this is the first time a lot of you have been anywhere near the notion of a prison, and we're quite happy to dole it out like willy-nilly to people whose lives we destroy for absolutely no benefit to us, the victims, the taxpayer, the people who need protecting from victims, so from offenders. So we need to, I want us to, over the next month or so, think about offenders. Think about crime. Oh look, I'll show you a bit of an extract from this. Look. Ooh, can't see it. I wish I could. Well, it doesn't work even if you do it like that, does it? Well, you can tell I'm a master of photography. The Economics of Crime, Chapter 3. To devise a better way of dealing with crime, you need to know what you're dealing with. To do that, you need to understand what motivates people to commit crime. Crime is a two-headed coin. Every time a crime takes place, someone, the victim, loses, and someone, the offender, gains. The beneficiaries of crime are as follows. I've set them into what seems like an obvious order, but as becomes clear, sometimes the order of who benefits most changes. Number one, the person who benefits the most from crime, the offender. The offender always gains from a crime. That gain might be physical, financial, emotional, or sexual. Number two, the legal business. The legal industry, lawyers, solicitors, and judges gain from crime. They make money, win, lose, or draw, and many are not interested in justice per se, but in the process and how they can use that to benefit themselves financially. That's particularly pertinent in the States. Number three, and this is really pertinent in the States, the associated professionals. Crime has spawned a plethora of people who've elevated themselves to the role of professional advisor. These include social workers, probation officers, prison officers, police officers, drug and substance abuse counsellors, and behavioural experts in every shade and colour. All of these associated professionals work in a counterintuitive world where they are perversely rewarded for failing and penalised for succeeding. Now this is an interesting point to look at. If a probation officer intervenes with a criminal in such a way as to stop the criminal committing a crime, their budget will be cut and they will lose their job because there will be less crime to fight. If the police deal with crime effectively and crimes fall, they too will lose their jobs. If a substance abuse counsellor cleans up his or her client, they too will lose their way of making a living. Now there's something you never thought of, eh? Right, I'm going to leave that and shut down for the day. If there's anyone out there in America who's watching this, could you please go round to the fucking White House and ask Donald Trump to be a little bit more succinct and not stop fucking repeating the same thing again and again and again, as if that will distract everyone from what's going on. I would like to see the press announcements kept down to about 20 minutes, not the 1 hour fucking 40 minutes of drivel they were yesterday. Okay, pig fans, I'm off now.